An American girl married an Arab millionaire, and he died in an accident the next day. The investigation results shocked everyone. In the opulent city of Dubai, where skyscrapers rise like monuments to human ambition and the desert whispers ancient secrets, Sophie stepped off the plane, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. The scorching heat enveloped her like a heavy cloak, so different from the mild climate of her native Montana, America. She had crossed oceans and continents to attend the wedding of her cousin Francesca, an event that promised to be as extravagant as the city itself. The young woman, with striking green eyes and hair as dark as the desert night, felt slightly out of place in this world of luxury and excess. Yet the anticipation of seeing her beloved cousin marry a wealthy Arab man overshadowed any discomfort she felt. The hotel where Sophie was staying resembled a modern palace, with fountains that danced to the rhythm of invisible music and chandeliers that sparkled like cascades of frozen diamonds. She got ready for the ceremony with trembling hands, her thoughts drifting back to Felix, her boyfriend of 5 years, who had remained in America, wrapped in his usual indifference toward her dreams and desires. The wedding was a spectacle beyond imagination. Under a tent woven with threads of gold and silver, Francesca shone like a celestial vision. Her white gown, adorned with pearls and diamonds, caught the light of the setting sun. The groom, an elegant man with a kind smile, looked at Francesca as if she were the only star in the vast desert sky. During the reception, with the air perfumed by exotic spices and desert flowers, Sophie saw him for the first time. Xavier, the groom's cousin, moved through the crowd with the grace of a desert lion. His dark eyes, deep as oil wells, met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Francesca, glowing with happiness, approached Sophie and, with a knowing smile, introduced her to Xavier. "This is my husband's cousin," she said, her smile hiding more than it revealed. "Xavier, meet my favorite cousin, Sophie." Their words flowed like water in an oasis, fresh and invigorating. Xavier spoke English with an exotic accent that Sophie found captivating. They shared laughter, stories about their different cultures, and before they knew it, hours had passed. The bustling reception faded into the background as their connection deepened. As the night wore on, Sophie found herself thinking less and less about Felix and more about the enigmatic man sitting across from her. Xavier was everything Felix was not: attentive, eager to learn about her, and respectful of her opinions. Each word, every gesture, felt like an invitation into a new and exciting world. Francesca, ever the sharp observer, slipped over to Sophie when Xavier stepped away for a moment. "Do you see what you've been missing all these years?" she whispered gently. "That man is worth 100 Felix. Don't waste your life with someone who doesn't value you." Her cousin's words rang in Sophie's mind like warning bells. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where her dreams weren't dismissed as childish fantasies, where love wasn't a burden but a source of joy and growth. The week in Dubai passed like a fever dream. Sophie found herself torn between the guilt of the feelings Xavier stirred within her and the thrill of discovering a new world. Each day brought new wonders: rides through the desert beneath star-filled skies, dinners in restaurants that seemed pulled from the pages of 1001 Nights, and conversations that stretched into the early morning hours. Xavier showed her a side of Arab life that went beyond the stereotypes, beyond the preconceived notions. He spoke to her of poetry, philosophy, and the scientific contributions his people had made to the world. Through his eyes, Sophie saw a respect and admiration she had never experienced with Felix. Every moment with Xavier was like a glimpse into a life she hadn't known she could have. A life filled with adventure, wonder, and the possibility of love that grew rather than stifled. Yet even in those moments of joy, The weight of her long relationship with Felix lingered like a shadow. The day of her departure came too soon. At the airport, surrounded by the hum of travelers from every corner of the globe, Sophie said her goodbyes to Francesca and Xavier, her heart heavy with the weight of leaving. "Don't forget what you experienced here," Francesca whispered as they embraced. "You deserve happiness, cousin. Don't settle for less." Xavier, holding Sophie's hands gently in his own, looked at her with eyes that spoke more than words ever could. "Above all," he said softly, "remember, there's always an oasis waiting to be found. I hope you discover yours, Sophie." His words echoed in her mind long after she boarded the plane that would take her back to America. As the gleaming city of gold and glass shrank beneath the airplane's wings, she felt as though a piece of her had been left behind, buried in the sands of the desert, waiting to be unearthed. Returning to America felt like waking from a dream, only to fall into a monotonous gray reality. Sophie found herself trudging through the familiar streets of her city, every corner and building reminding her of the life she had only briefly left behind. The once comforting smells of tacos and the lively bustle of the markets now seemed like faint echoes, barely able to stir her after the vibrancy of Dubai. Felix was waiting for her at the apartment they shared, his face a mix of relief and reproach. "You're finally back," he said, not even bothering to ask how her trip had gone. Guilt pierced her as she thought of Xavier's attentiveness, so different from Felix's cold indifference. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Sophie tried to lose herself in her daily routine, her work as a graphic designer, meeting up with friends, but everything seemed dull compared to the excitement of the desert adventures. Every night, as she closed her eyes, her mind wandered back to the golden streets of Dubai, to Xavier's warm smile, and to the overwhelming sense of endless possibilities she had felt there. The phone calls from Francesca became her lifeline, a fragile thread connecting her to that dream world. Her cousin, now pregnant and glowing with happiness, would share stories of her new life, of her husband's kindness and the warmth of his family. And always, in a seemingly casual aside, Francesca would mention Xavier. "He asks about you, you know," she'd say, her voice playful and conspiratorial. "He says he's never met anyone like you." Each time Francesca mentioned Xavier, Sophie's heart raced, but guilt gnawed at her. How could she be thinking of another man when Felix, despite his flaws, had been her companion for so long? Doubts crept in during the quietest moments, while cooking dinner, during work meetings, and in the long, restless nights. Felix, oblivious to the storm raging inside Sophie, remained distant, sometimes even dismissive. His comments about her lavish trip to Dubai were laced with resentment. "Seems like your Arab prince fantasy is over," he spat one evening, after she suggested they try a new restaurant. It was during one of those tense nights that Francesca called with news. She was pregnant. Her voice brimmed with joy, and for a moment, Sophie allowed herself to feel the happiness of her cousin's good fortune. But then Francesca dropped the real bombshell, the one Sophie wasn't prepared for. "I want you to be here for the baby," Francesca said, her voice full of excitement, but with an undercurrent of something Sophie couldn't quite place. The invitation hung in the air, both a promise and a threat. Sophie knew that accepting it would mean facing her feelings for Xavier head-on. The joy in Francesca's voice was contagious, and for a brief moment, Sophie allowed herself to share in her cousin's happiness. But then Francesca dropped the bombshell, her words leaving little room for protest. "It's important to me that you're here," she said. The invitation hung in the air, feeling both like a promise and a warning. Sophie knew that accepting meant more than just attending. It meant confronting feelings she had tried to bury, seeing Xavier again, and testing the fragile stability she had managed to maintain with Felix. That night, as Felix snored softly beside her, Sophie slipped out of bed and stepped onto the apartment balcony. The city sprawled before her, a sea of blinking lights that somehow seemed dimmer than the memories of those starry desert nights. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost feel the warm breeze of the Persian Gulf against her skin, smell the spices and incense, and hear the melodic laughter of Xavier. The decision formed in her mind before she could fully comprehend it. She would go to Dubai. Sophie told herself it was for something else, for someone else. But deep down, she knew the truth. The preparations for the trip were a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. When she told Felix about her plans, his reaction was as indifferent as ever. "Off with the Arabs again," he grumbled, never lifting his eyes from his phone. "Just don't get too used to that life of luxury." Sophie packed her suitcase with trembling hands, each piece of clothing a decision laden with meaning. What should she wear when she saw Xavier? Was it wrong to even think about it? She felt more like a teenager preparing for her first date than a grown woman in a steady relationship. The night before her departure, Sophie lay awake, her mind a chaotic storm of conflicting thoughts. On one hand, there was the safety of her life with Felix, a relationship that, while imperfect, was familiar and predictable. On the other hand, there was the promise of something new, something exciting, and potentially transformative with Xavier. As the dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sophie made up her mind. This trip would be a test, an opportunity to understand what she truly wanted in life. She would allow herself to feel, to experience, without the weight of guilt or restraint. By the time she returned to America, she would make a definitive decision about her future. With that resolution, Sophie closed her suitcase and prepared for the journey that would change her life forever. The taxi that would take her to the airport waited below, and with each step she took toward it, she felt herself moving further away from her old life and closer to an uncertain yet thrilling future. The plane touched down in Dubai amid a sandstorm, as if the desert itself wanted to veil her arrival. Through the fogged-up windows, the city emerged like a golden mirage, its skyscrapers standing defiantly against the elements. Sophie's heart pounded in time with the sand whipping against the plane, a turbulent prelude to whatever lay ahead. Francesca was waiting for her at the airport, her belly noticeably rounder now, her face glowing with happiness and excitement. The cousins embraced for what felt like an eternity, as if they were trying to make up for all the time they had been apart. "You're finally here," Francesca exclaimed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "There's so much to tell you, so much to show you." The ride from the airport was a blur of rapid conversations and nervous laughter. Francesca talked non-stop about the baby preparations, about how wonderful her husband was, and about how life in Dubai had exceeded every expectation. Sophie listened, a mix of joy for her cousin and an unspoken anticipation swirling inside her. And then, with a mischievous smile, Francesca let slip the news that Sophie had both feared and longed to hear. "Xavier has been asking about you, you know. I think he'd love to know you're here." Sophie's heart skipped a beat, and suddenly the car's air conditioning felt inadequate against the heat rising inside her. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and experiences. Sophie threw herself into life in Dubai with an abandon that surprised even her. She joined Francesca in picking out decorations for the baby's nursery, sampling exotic dishes in lavish restaurants, and marveling at the seamless blend of tradition and modernity that characterized every corner of the city. Then, as if fate had been waiting for just the right moment, Xavier appeared. It was during a small family dinner at Francesca's house, a gathering to celebrate the upcoming birth. When Sophie saw him walk in, it felt as though the world itself had paused. Xavier looked even more handsome than she remembered, his warm smile lighting up the room. Their eyes met across the table, and in that instant, Sophie knew she was lost. Conversation between them flowed effortlessly, as if the months of separation had never existed. They talked about art, music, their dreams, and their fears. With every word, every gesture, Sophie felt something within her stir, something that had lain dormant for so long. That night, lying awake in Francesca's guest room, Sophie made a decision. With trembling hands, she took out the phone she had secretly bought before the trip. A new number, a new identity, a chance to explore this growing feeling without the weight of her life in America. The days became a delicate dance of secret messages and stolen moments. Xavier showed her parts of Dubai that tourists rarely saw: hidden cafes in narrow alleys, avant-garde art galleries nestled in modern buildings, sunsets over the desert that looked like brushstrokes of fire across the sky. With each shared moment, Sophie felt something powerful and terrifying grow inside her. This was more than attraction, more than the fleeting infatuation of youth. It was a deep connection, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Yet guilt gnawed at her. Every night before bed, she would glance at the picture of Felix on her other phone, the one that kept her tethered to the life she had left behind in America. 5 years of history couldn't be erased so easily. How could she be feeling all this for Xavier when she was still committed to Felix? Francesca, always perceptive, noticed the change in her cousin. One afternoon, as they sipped tea on a balcony overlooking the Persian Gulf, she gently broached the subject. "You seem different, Sophie. Happier, more alive. It's because of him, isn't it?" Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes as all the confusion, fear, and excitement she had been bottling up came spilling out. Between sobs, she told Francesca everything: the encounters with Xavier, the feelings she was developing, and her fear of hurting Felix. Francesca listened quietly, her eyes filled with compassion. When Sophie finished, her cousin took her hands and spoke with quiet resolve. "Sometimes love comes when you least expect it, in ways you never imagined. But when it's real, when it makes you feel more like yourself, you can't ignore it. You deserve to be happy, Sophie. And if that happiness is with Xavier, then you have to be brave enough to follow it." Those words echoed in Sophie's mind like a call to action. That night, after another magical evening with Xavier at a restaurant overlooking the famous Dubai fountains, she made the hardest decision of her life. She called Felix. The conversation was painful, filled with awkward silences and broken words. Felix's emotions swung wildly, from disbelief to anger, and finally to pleading. "How can you do this to me?" he shouted. 5 years together, and you're throwing it all away for a stranger?" Sophie tried to explain, to make him understand that it wasn't just about Xavier, but about how she felt, about the life she wanted to live. But Felix wasn't listening. His last words before hanging up were a thinly veiled threat. "This isn't over, Sophie. I'm not going to lose you like this." The relief Sophie had expected to feel after ending the relationship didn't come. Instead, she was left with a strange mix of guilt, fear, and a haunting sense of freedom. That night, as the city glowed under the desert moon, she cried for the end of one chapter in her life and the uncertain beginning of another. The days that followed were an emotional whirlwind. When Xavier learned of the breakup, he was understanding and patient, giving Sophie the space she needed to process her feelings. Francesca and her husband became her pillars of support, offering comfort and advice. Slowly, Sophie allowed herself to fully embrace her time with Xavier. There were no more secrets, no more guilt. Sophie could walk hand in hand with Xavier through the glittering streets of Dubai, share kisses under the desert's endless sky, and dream of their future without the weight of her past. During one of these blissful moments, as they wandered through a garden blooming with roses, Xavier paused beneath an arch of flowers. Taking Sophie's hands in his, he asked the question that would forever change the course of their lives. "Sophie, my love, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. The scent of roses, the gentle hum of people nearby, it all faded into the background. In that instant, it was just the two of them, their hearts beating as one. When Sophie looked into Xavier's eyes, she saw everything she had ever longed for: love, respect, and a true partnership. "Yes," she whispered, her voice soft but certain. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss they shared afterward felt like a vow, a promise of a new beginning. As Xavier slid a diamond ring onto her finger, Sophie knew she had finally found her place in the world, her oasis in the vast desert of life. The ring on her hand sparkled with the brilliance of 1,000 desert suns, a constant reminder of the new life she had chosen. The days following Xavier's proposal were a whirlwind of emotions, plans, and shared dreams. Dubai, with its fusion of ancient traditions and cutting-edge modernity, seemed the perfect backdrop for their love story, one that crossed borders and cultures. Francesca, glowing in the final stages of her pregnancy, was over the moon for her cousin. "I knew it!" she'd exclaimed repeatedly, her eyes gleaming with joy. "I knew the two of you were meant to be together." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon Sophie was swept up in the flurry of wedding preparations that blended the best of her Mexican heritage with Xavier's rich Arab traditions. Xavier was as attentive and loving as ever, anticipating Sophie's every need. He introduced her to his extended family, a sprawling, warm-hearted group who welcomed her with open arms. The women, especially the matriarchs, guided Sophie through local customs, while the men regaled her with wild stories of Xavier's youth. Yet, despite all this joy, a shadow still lingered in Sophie's heart: Felix. Though distance and time had passed since their breakup, Felix's presence still haunted her. His texts and calls had not stopped, swinging between desperate pleas and thinly veiled threats. One night, as Sophie and Xavier dined on the terrace of their new apartment with a breathtaking view of the Burj Khalifa, her phone buzzed with another message from Felix. "Don't think this is over. What we have is stronger than any desert mirage." A chill ran down Sophie's spine, but she chose not to tell Xavier. She didn't want to cloud their happiness with the ghosts of her past. As their wedding day drew closer, Sophie buried herself even more deeply in her new life in Dubai. She took up Arabic lessons, explored the city's hidden corners, and marveled at how the desert and modern metropolis coexisted in perfect harmony. Every day brought new adventures, and with each one, Sophie's decision to stay felt more and more right. Yet nostalgia for her homeland and her family in America crept up at unexpected moments. The smell of a dish that reminded her of her mother's kitchen, an American song playing in a passing taxi, or the sight of an American family touring the city would tug at her heartstrings. It was during one of these reflective moments that her phone rang, delivering news that would shake her to her core. Her mother's voice, frail and strained, broke through the line. "Your father had a heart attack. He's stable, but the doctors say he needs surgery. We need you here." Sophie's heart dropped. The weight of her worlds, old and new, suddenly collided, leaving her torn between the life she had built with Xavier and the family she had left behind. The news hit Sophie like a bucket of cold water. Suddenly, the distance between Dubai and America felt impossible to bridge. Without a second thought, she began packing, determined to fly out that very night. Xavier, ever understanding, insisted on coming with her. "Your family is my family now," he said firmly. "We'll get through this together." The journey back to America was long and tense. Every minute felt like torture as Sophie's thoughts fixated on her father lying in a hospital bed. When they finally touched down in Montana, The contrast with Dubai couldn't have been sharper. The chaos, the noise, the familiar smells, everything hit her like a wave of both nostalgia and anxiety. At the hospital, the scene was heartbreaking. Her father, once so strong and full of life, now lay connected to machines that beeped in a steady rhythm. Her mother, with dark circles under her eyes and a face etched with worry, embraced them both tightly. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. The days that followed blurred into one another. Endless medical consultations, hushed conversations in hospital hallways, and sleepless nights spent keeping vigil by her father's bedside. Through it all, Xavier was a constant presence, offering quiet support and earning the respect and affection of Sophie's family with his kindness and unwavering dedication. One night, while Sophie sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee, she came face to face with Felix. Time seemed to freeze as they locked eyes, years of shared history and recent wounds hanging between them like an unspoken barrier. "So it's true," Felix said, his voice heavy with a mixture of pain and resignation. "You're marrying him, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a realization, something he had finally come to accept. Sophie found herself speechless, struggling to find the right words. How could she explain that her heart now beat to the rhythm of a new life? A love that made her feel complete in ways she had never imagined. Felix took a step toward her, his hand reaching out as if to touch her, but then he stopped. "I hope you're happy," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I really do." And with those words, he turned and walked away, taking with him 5 years of memories and everything that might have been. That night, as Sophie wept in Xavier's arms, she knew that a chapter of her life had closed for good. The pain of letting go was intertwined with a deep sense of certainty. She was on the right path. In the days that followed, her father's health slowly improved. The surgery was a success, and with each passing day, Sophie saw life returning to his eyes. One quiet afternoon, as they sat alone in his hospital room, her father took her hand and glanced at the ring on her finger. "He's a good man," he said, his voice soft. "I can see it in his eyes, in the way he looks at you. He truly loves you." He paused, his eyes filling with tears. "You're going to be very happy, my girl. And even if you go far away, you will always be our daughter." Those words were the final push Sophie needed. With her family's blessing and a heart full of certainty, she made her final decision. She would move to Dubai permanently and begin her new life with Xavier. When she returned to Dubai, everything felt different. This time, she wasn't just a visitor or a tourist exploring a foreign land. Now it was home, the place where she would build her future. As the plane descended and the lights of the city flickered against the desert night, Sophie felt a peace she had never known before. Xavier was waiting for her at the airport, his smile as warm as the desert sun. "Welcome home, my love," he said, pulling her into a tender embrace. In that moment, nestled in the arms of the man she loved, with thoughts of her family in America tucked deep in her heart, Sophie knew she had found her place in the world. The months that followed her return to Dubai were a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation. The city, with its frenetic pace and ever-evolving skyline, seemed to mirror the energy of the couple, buzzing with nervous joy and a sense of adventure. Planning their wedding quickly became the center of their lives. Every detail, from the venue to the design of the invitations, was an intricate blend of American and Arab traditions. Sophie found herself swept up in a world of luxurious fabrics, aromatic spices, and ancient customs she had never imagined she'd be a part of. Xavier's family threw themselves wholeheartedly into the preparations, making her feel truly at home in her new world. Themselves wholeheartedly into the wedding preparations, his aunts and cousins took Sophie to the most exclusive boutiques in the city, where they spent hours selecting fabrics for her wedding gown. The dress would be a masterpiece in itself, a fusion of Western elegance and Arabian opulence, threads of gold woven through white lace, pearls, and crystals that shimmered in the desert light, all designed to make Sophie shine like a true princess from 1001 Nights. Meanwhile, Xavier focused on the logistics. They chose a luxurious resort on the outskirts of Dubai, where the desert met the sea, as the perfect backdrop for their sunset ceremony. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they would say their vows in front of family and friends. Francesca, now fully recovered from childbirth and with her baby in her arms, became Sophie's right hand. Together, they spent hours going over every detail, from the music to the menu. "I want it to be a celebration of both our cultures," Sophie insisted. And so, traditional American dishes were paired with Arab delicacies in a feast that promised to be unforgettable. As the wedding date approached, Sophie's excitement grew, but so did her anxiety. Despite her happiness, she couldn't help but think about her family and friends back in America. Would they truly understand her decision? Could they forgive her for choosing a life so far away from them? One night, as these doubts weighed heavily on her, Xavier surprised her with a gesture that melted away all her worries. He had organized a video call with her entire family in America. On the screen, she saw the beaming faces of her parents, siblings, aunts, and uncles, all gathered to send her their love and blessings from afar. "We couldn't miss your big day, sweetheart," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even if we can't be there in person, our hearts will be with you every step of the way." That night, as Sophie wept tears of joy in Xavier's arms, the last traces of doubt vanished. This was her choice, her path, and she had the love and support of everyone who mattered. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of final preparations. Family and friends began arriving from all over the world, and the hotel buzzed with activity. Guests marveled at the splendor of Dubai and the warmth of Arab hospitality. The night before the wedding, the traditional henna ceremony took place. Women from both families gathered in a lavishly decorated suite adorned with silk cushions and oil lamps. Skilled artists applied intricate henna designs to Sophie's hands and feet, while the women sang traditional songs and shared advice on married life. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Xavier celebrated with the men of his family. Laughter and music filled the air as they swapped stories and toasted to the couple's happiness. The morning of the wedding dawned under a cloudless sky, the sun shining brightly as if the desert itself wished to bless their union. Sophie woke with her heart pounding, a mix of nerves and excitement rushing through her. The hours blurred past. Stylists and makeup artists worked their magic, transforming her into a vision of beauty that left everyone breathless. Her dress, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, shimmered in the light as if it had come alive. Staring at her reflection, Sophie could hardly believe the transformation, both in her appearance and in her life. Who could have imagined just a year ago that she would be here, about to marry the man of her dreams in a country she now called home? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Francesca, glowing in her bridesmaid gown. "It's time," she said with an excited smile. "Everyone's waiting for you." With one last glance in the mirror and a deep breath, Sophie prepared to take the most important step of her life. As she walked toward the door, each step brought her closer not only to Xavier, but to a future filled with love, adventure, and infinite possibilities. The aisle leading to the ceremony was adorned with arches of white and gold flowers, creating a tunnel of beauty and fragrance. As Sophie walked forward, escorted by her father, who had flown in from America for the occasion, she could hear the harmonious blend of Arabic and mariachi music chosen for the ceremony, a perfect symbol of the union between their cultures At the end of the aisle, under a canopy of white silk, swaying gently in the desert breeze, stood Xavier, his face lit up with a smile that rivaled the setting sun as he saw Sophie. In that moment, nothing else existed. No doubts, no worries, no past. Just the two of them, ready to start their lives together. The ceremony was a beautiful fusion of traditions. A local imam officiated the Islamic portion, while a Catholic priest who had flown in from America led the Christian vows. Sophie and Xavier exchanged rings and promises of eternal love in both Arabic and English, their voices trembling with emotion. When they were finally pronounced husband and wife, the sky erupted in a display of fireworks that illuminated the desert. Guests cheered and applauded, showering the happy couple with rose petals and rice. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration of life and love, lasting well into the early hours of the morning. Tables were laden with culinary delights from both cultures, and the music alternated between lively Latin rhythms and enchanting Arabic melodies. But above all, it was the palpable joy of two families that had become one. As they danced their first waltz as husband and wife, Xavier leaned in close to Sophie and whispered, "Are you happy, my love?" With tears of joy in her eyes, Sophie could only nod. Words couldn't capture the fullness she felt in that moment. She had found not only love but a new home, a new family, and a life brimming with promise and adventure. When the party finally wound down and the last guests had departed, Sophie and Xavier found themselves alone in their bridal suite. Standing on the balcony, gazing out at the vast desert bathed in moonlight, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, wrapping his arms around her. "How lucky I am," Sophie replied softly, "and how life can take you on such unexpected, beautiful journeys if you have the courage to follow your heart." Xavier kissed her gently. "This is only the beginning, my love. We have our whole lives ahead to create our own stories, our very own 1001 nights." And so, under the starry desert sky, Sophie and Xavier began their new life together, a modern fairy tale born from the meeting and merging of two worlds. The morning after the wedding broke with an unusual stillness. The desert seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing something was about to change. Sophie woke, cradled in Xavier's arms, her heart overflowing with happiness and hope for the future they were just beginning to build together. The plan for that day was simple. After a late breakfast with the closest family members who had stayed behind, Sophie and Xavier would head to their new home, a luxurious apartment in the heart of Dubai, with sweeping views of the city and the desert beyond. They would spend a few days there before embarking on their honeymoon, a trip to the most paradisiacal islands in Southeast Asia. Breakfast was warm and intimate, filled with laughter and excited talks about the future. Sophie's parents, who would stay in Dubai for a few more days, couldn't hide their happiness and pride. "I've never seen you look so radiant, sweetheart," her mother said, tears welling in her eyes. "Xavier is a good man, and anyone can see how much he loves you." After tearful goodbyes, promises to keep in touch, and a few more embraces, Sophie and Xavier climbed into their car, a sleek, luxurious sports car, a wedding gift from Xavier's family. With her wedding veil flowing out the window and the sparkle of her wedding ring catching the sun, Sophie felt like she was living in a dream. The drive through the city started off peacefully. Xavier drove carefully, pointing out landmarks and sharing plans for their future together. "There," he said, nodding toward a skyscraper still under construction. "That's where my new office will be. And just beyond that, you see that park? We could spend weekends there," Xavier continued with a soft smile. "Maybe someday? With our kids." Sophie smiled at the thought. Something that had once felt so distant now seemed like a beautiful promise within reach. She was about to respond when something in the rearview mirror caught her eye. A black car was following them closely. Too closely. For a brief moment, a chill ran through her, an unsettling feeling, but she quickly brushed it off. This was their day of happiness. Nothing could go wrong. Then everything happened in a matter of seconds. The black car suddenly sped up, slamming into the back of their vehicle with such force that Sophie felt as if the world had been shaken apart. Xavier struggled to regain control of the car, but the speed and impact were too great. Their car skidded, spinning wildly out of control. Sophie screamed, reaching out desperately for Xavier. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, filled with terror and love, as if they were both silently saying, "I'm sorry and I love you." Then the world went black. When Sophie regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the acrid smell of gasoline and the distant wail of sirens. Pain shot through her body as she tried to move. Her wedding dress, once immaculate, was now smeared with dirt and blood. To her horror, she realized they were trapped. The car overturned at the edge of a steep drop. "Xavier," she called out weakly, her voice barely a whisper. There was no response. In the distance, she could hear frantic voices, footsteps rushing toward them. Someone was calling emergency services, describing the scene in a trembling voice. "There's been a terrible accident. The car went over the cliff. We need to get them out." The next few minutes blurred into a frantic flurry of activity. Rescue teams worked desperately to free them from the wreckage. Sophie felt herself drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness, her physical pain battling with the agony in her heart. Where was Xavier? Why wasn't he responding? When they finally pulled her from the wreckage, the blinding desert sun momentarily obscured her vision. Through the haze of pain and confusion, she saw paramedics working frantically on another figure lying on the ground. "Xavier! No pulse!" one of the paramedics shouted, starting CPR. Sophie tried to scream, tried to move toward him, but her body wouldn't obey. She felt herself being lifted into an ambulance, the shrill wail of the sirens drowning out her weak cries. "Xavier, please. Xavier." The ride to the hospital was a blurry nightmare. Sophie fought to stay conscious, clinging to the desperate hope that Xavier would be okay, that this was all just a terrible dream she would soon wake from. But at the hospital, the chaos continued. Doctors and nurses rushed around, shouting orders and calling for equipment. Sophie was quickly taken into surgery, her battered body in need of immediate care. Hours later, when she finally awoke in the ICU, the first thing she saw was her mother's tear-streaked face. "Mama," she croaked, her voice raw and weak. "Where is Xavier?" Her mother grasped her hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my sweet girl," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." In that moment, Sophie knew. She knew before the words were spoken, before the cruel reality was confirmed. Xavier was gone. Her love, her future, her dreams. Everything had been ripped away in an instant, as quickly as the crash that had separated them. The scream that tore from her throat was the sound of a heart breaking, of a soul being torn in two. It echoed through the sterile hospital halls, drawing nurses to her room with sedatives in hand, trying to ease the unbearable pain, but nothing could numb the ache in her chest. Xavier was gone, and no amount of medicine could ever fix that. The days that followed were a blur of pain, both physical and emotional. Sophie drifted in and out of a haze, lost in a sea of medication and grief, unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what she had lost. Her body healed slowly from the fractures and bruises, but her heart remained shattered beyond repair. Xavier's family, grieving their own tremendous loss, stayed close by her side. His mother, her eyes swollen from days of crying, would sit for hours at Sophie's bedside, holding her hand in silence. No words were necessary. Their shared sorrow created a bond deeper than any language could express. Meanwhile, the tragic accident had made headlines, spreading across Dubai and beyond like wildfire. Local and international newspapers ran stories about the young couple whose fairy tale had been abruptly cut short. Wedding photos from just a day before the crash were now painfully juxtaposed with images of the mangled car at the bottom of the ravine. As Sophie's physical strength slowly returned, so too did the questions about the accident. Questions that hinted at something more sinister beneath the surface. Dubai's police launched an exhaustive investigation, but answers seemed elusive, slipping through their fingers like desert sand. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights in the hospital, as Sophie stared out the window at the shimmering city that had once seemed so magical, that a detective knocked softly at her door. With a gentle demeanor, he showed her the security footage from the day of the accident, the black car that had followed them and rammed into them. There was something chillingly familiar about it. Sophie's heart stopped. She recognized the make and model. It was the same kind of car Felix, her ex-boyfriend, used to drive back in America. But no, that couldn't be possible. Felix was thousands of miles away. He was in America, wasn't he? Yet, as that poisonous seed of doubt took root in her mind, she couldn't shake the thought. Could Felix have followed her all the way to Dubai? Could he have been so consumed by his obsession that he was willing to destroy not just her happiness, but Xavier's life as well? These questions haunted her, refusing to let go. She realized she needed answers, not just for her own sake, but for Xavier, for the life and the future they'd had stolen from them. Fueled by a mix of grief and rage, she made up her mind. As soon as she was strong enough, she would search for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie slowly regained her physical strength. But the wound inside her soul remained wide open, bleeding. Every corner of Dubai was a reminder of Xavier. Every desert sunset echoed the dreams they had shared. His funeral was a surreal experience. She stood at his grave, draped in black, a cruel contrast to the white wedding dress she had worn just weeks before. The sympathy, the words of comfort, the pitying glances from others, they all slid off her like water on glass. She was numb, unable to cry, unable to feel anything but an overwhelming emptiness. It was during the funeral that she noticed something odd. Among the mourners, she caught a glimpse of a face she thought she knew, a face that didn't belong there. For a brief moment, she was sure it was Felix, watching from a distance, his expression a twisted mask of conflicting emotions. But when she blinked and looked again, the figure had vanished. Had it been real? Or was it just her tormented mind playing tricks on her? She couldn't be sure. But the seed of doubt planted itself even deeper, refusing to be ignored. As the days passed, Sophie threw herself into the investigation. She worked closely with the Dubai police, reviewing hours of security footage, flight records, hotel logs. Every small detail became a clue, a thread she hoped would unravel the truth. Her search for answers became an obsession, a way to keep Xavier's memory alive and to make sense of the tragedy that had torn her life apart. She spent sleepless nights piecing together the puzzle, connecting dots, hunting for that one missing link that would explain everything. Xavier's family, still deeply worried for her, urged her to return to America, to escape the painful memories that haunted every corner of Dubai. But Sophie refused. She couldn't leave, not until she knew the truth, not until she found justice for Xavier. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights of relentless research that she received the anonymous call. The voice on the other end was distorted, a low, chilling whisper. Not all accidents are accidents. Look to the desert, where secrets are buried beneath the sand. The cryptic message sent shivers down her spine, but it also sparked a glimmer of hope. Could this be the lead she had been searching for? Without wasting a moment, Sophie reached out to a local private investigator, someone who knew the ins and outs of Dubai, along with its hidden dangers. Together, they began unraveling a web of lies and deception that extended far beyond the tragic accident. As they dug deeper into the investigation, disturbing connections started to surface. The black car that had rammed into them had been rented by a phantom company, and after thorough investigation, it became clear that this company had suspicious ties to shady business dealings in America. Each new clue brought Sophie closer to a truth she feared but had to confront. Could Felix really have crossed oceans and borders to destroy her happiness? Or was there something even bigger, something more sinister at play? As the search for answers continued, Sophie found herself transformed. The pain and loss had forged a will of steel inside her. She was no longer the naive young woman who had come to Dubai seeking love and adventure. Now she was a woman on a mission, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The desert nights, once filled with romance and promises, were now heavy with danger and secrets. Sophie ventured into Dubai's underworld, where money spoke louder than law, and where secrets were buried as deeply as oil beneath the sand. With every step toward the truth, she felt herself drawing closer to Xavier, closer to the justice he deserved. But she also knew she was walking a dangerous path, one from which there might be no return. As the moon rose high over the desert, casting the dunes in a silver glow, Sophie stood in the place where she had once been happiest, where she had lost everything. With one hand over her heart and the other clutching Xavier's wedding band, she made a silent vow. "I will find justice for you, my love," she whispered into the desert wind. "No matter what it takes, no matter where it leads me, I will uncover the truth and honor your memory." This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of her quest for the truth. And so, under the starry desert sky, Sophie embarked on the most dangerous and challenging chapter of her life. One that would force her to confront not only the demons of her past, but also dark forces she had never imagined. The sun was sinking into the horizon, painting the desert sky in crimson and gold, when Sophie's phone rang. It was the private detective she had hired, his voice tight and urgent on the other end. "Sophie," he said, his tone sending a chill through her. "We've found something big. I need to meet with you immediately." Without a second thought, Sophie headed to their meeting spot, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Dubai. The place was nearly empty, with only a few businessmen lost in their laptops and tired tourists sipping their last cups of coffee before heading back to their hotels. The detective, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a neatly trimmed mustache, was waiting for her at a table in the far corner. As soon as Sophie sat down, he pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "What I'm about to show you," he said in a low voice, "could be dangerous. Are you sure you want to move forward?" Sophie didn't hesitate. "I need to know the truth," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. The detective nodded gravely and opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and what looked like transcriptions of phone calls. But what caught Sophie's attention were the photographs, images of a man she knew all too well, Felix. The photos showed him in various places around Dubai in the days leading up to and following the accident. In one, he was seen talking to a suspicious-looking man in a dimly lit alley. In another, he was getting into the same black car that had crashed into Xavier's vehicle. "We've tracked his movements," the detective explained. "He arrived in Dubai 3 days before your wedding. He checked into a hotel under a fake name and started following both you and Xavier. But here's where it gets interesting." The detective pointed to a transcript of a phone call. "This is an intercepted conversation between Felix and an unidentified man. They're discussing a job, and they specifically mention the date of your wedding." Sophie felt the world fade around her. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, forming a picture that was both clear and terrifying. Felix hadn't just followed her to Dubai, he had actively plotted to destroy her happiness. "But why?" Sophie whispered, more to herself than to the detective. "How could he go this far?" The detective looked at her with a mix of compassion and concern. "Love and hate are two sides of the same coin, ma'am. Sometimes, when love twists, it becomes something far darker and more dangerous." As Sophie processed this information, the detective continued to reveal more details. There was circumstantial evidence tying Felix to the rental of the black car, witnesses who had seen him lurking near the scene of the crash, and even footage from a security camera that captured a similar vehicle speeding away just moments after the impact. Each new piece of information felt like a dagger to Sophie's heart. The idea that someone she had once loved could be capable of such cruelty was almost unbearable, but at the same time, she felt a fierce determination growing inside her. Now that she knew the truth, she wouldn't rest until justice was served. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, though underlined with steel. The detective looked at her seriously. "We have enough evidence to take this to the authorities. But I have to warn you, Miss Sophie, once we start this process, there's no turning back. Your life could be in danger." Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, remembering Xavier's smile, the sparkle in his eyes when he proposed, the warmth of his embrace. When she opened them again, they were filled with unshakable resolve. "I don't care about the danger," she said firmly. "Xavier deserves justice, and I won't stop until he gets it." The detective nodded in approval. "Very well. Here's what we're going to do." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sophie and the detective met with Dubai authorities, presenting the evidence they had gathered. The police, impressed by the thoroughness of the investigation, acted quickly. An international arrest warrant was issued for Felix, and the ports and airports across the UAE were placed on high alert. The possibility that Felix might try to silence her was too great to ignore. She was assigned round-the-clock security and advised to limit her movements. The days that followed were an agonizing blend of waiting and anxiety. Every noise, every shadow, made Sophie jump, wondering if Felix was coming for her. But strangely, she also felt a sense of calm. For the first time since the accident, she felt like she was doing something, honoring Xavier's memory in the only way she knew how. A week after her meeting with the detective, the news came. The police had found Felix trying to cross the border into Oman. There had been a chase, a brief exchange of gunfire, and finally, his capture. When Sophie saw Felix for the first time since the accident, handcuffed and escorted by police officers, she could barely recognize the man she once loved. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, filled with a mix of rage and desperation. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. The trial that followed was a media circus. The story of the widowed bride, the jealous ex-boyfriend, and the tragic accident captured the world's attention. Reporters from every corner of the globe descended on Dubai, eager to report on every detail of the case. Sophie stood strong throughout the trial, her testimony delivered with a quiet strength that impressed even the most seasoned judges. She spoke of her love for Xavier, the plans they had made together, and how it had all been shattered in a single moment of senseless violence. As for Felix, he crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Confronted with the undeniable proof of his involvement in the crash, he finally confessed. The verdict came swiftly and unanimously: guilty. As Felix was led out of the courtroom, his eyes sought Sophie one last time. There was something in his gaze, part plea for forgiveness, part defiance. But Sophie didn't flinch. Xavier had his justice, and that was all that mattered. Sophie's testimony was delivered with a strength that even the most seasoned judges found remarkable. She recounted her love story with Xavier, the dreams they had built together, and how everything had unraveled in a single senseless moment of violence. Felix, on the other hand, crumbled under the weight of the overwhelming evidence. Confronted with undeniable proof of his involvement in the accident, he finally confessed. His admission, filled with bitterness and late regret, exposed the depths of his obsession and the twisted corners of a love that had decayed into hatred. "I couldn't bear to see her happy with someone else," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought that if I couldn't have her, no one should." The verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty. As they led Felix out of the courtroom, his eyes sought out Sophie one last time. A silent plea for forgiveness mixed with a quiet challenge. With the trial over and justice seemingly served, Sophie stood at a crossroads. The truth she had fought so hard to uncover was now laid bare, but the emptiness in her heart remained. Dubai, once the backdrop of her sweetest dreams, was now stained with bitter memories. One sleepless night, as she wandered through the empty streets of the city, Sophie made a decision. She couldn't stay in Dubai, but neither could she return to America. She needed a fresh start, a place where she could honor Xavier's memory without being constantly haunted by the echoes of their shared past. With a heavy yet determined heart, Sophie began making plans. She sold the apartment she had briefly shared with Xavier, donating most of the proceeds to a foundation for traffic accident victims. She packed the few belongings she cherished, including Xavier's wedding ring. Though the parting was sorrowful, Xavier's family understood her need for a new beginning. They made her promise to stay in touch, reminding her that Dubai would always be her second home. On the day of her departure, Sophie paid one last visit to Xavier's grave. She laid a bouquet of desert flowers, the same kind that had adorned their wedding, and stood in silence, saying goodbye to the man she had loved and lost. "I'll carry you with me always," she whispered, her fingers tracing Xavier's name on the headstone. "And I promise to live my life to the fullest, for both of us." With one final glance at the Dubai skyline, where skyscrapers rose like towers of glass and steel dreams, Sophie boarded the plane that would carry her into an uncertain future. As the plane lifted into the air, taking her away from the city that had witnessed both her greatest joy and deepest sorrow, Sophie closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw Xavier's smiling face, heard his laughter, and felt the warmth of his embrace. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would carry the love she shared with Xavier as a beacon to guide her through the days ahead. The sun set over the desert as the plane flew away, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. It was a new dawn for Sophie, an unwritten chapter in the book of her life. And while her heart still ached from the loss, it beat with the promise of new adventures, new loves, and perhaps one day, the peace she so longed for. Years passed, like grains of sand in an hourglass, steady and silent, as Sophie tried to rebuild her life far from Dubai and the painful memories the city held. She had settled in a small coastal town in southern Spain, where the Mediterranean kissed the shore, and the sun shone almost as brightly as it had in the desert she had left behind. Here, in this peaceful corner of the world, Sophie sought a new purpose. She opened a small art gallery, blending works from local artists with pieces inspired by her time in the Arab world. Art had become her refuge, a way to channel the storm of emotions that still churned inside her. Thank you all for following Sophie's emotional journey, from love and loss to her relentless pursuit of justice in the heart of the Dubai desert. This story was not just about heartbreak, but about strength, fighting for the truth, and the courage to seek happiness despite the odds. If this story touched you and gave you something meaningful, Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next inspiring stories. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Do you think Sophie will find true happiness after everything? Thank you for your constant support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.